All right, welcome to our next session. We are excited to start session 6 with our first paper entitled Archaeology of Self, Reflexivity and Data Activism to Address Systemic Injustices. And we'll welcome up our speaker. Thank you.
In our research, we document how reflexivity is vital in the data science development process because it guides the questions, the problems, and communities scholars engage with. For example, one student from my data activism program reflected, even though I come from an Afro-Latino country, I never related myself or considered myself African American, especially because I'm also pretty light. I was very confused at first, but I realized that maybe I should relate more to this identity than I initially thought. This quote highlights the complexity of reflexivity, examining how personal and societal narratives shape one's mission to challenge oppression. Today, I'll be presenting findings from a prior research study which explores how reflexivity, specifically through the archaeology of self framework, can shift how data scientists and AI practitioners approach bias in data activism projects. Hi, my name is Raechel Walker. I'm a PhD student at the MIT Media Lab, and I would like to give a huge thank you to my co-authors, Brady Cruse, Aisha Cora, Dr. Kantwon Rogers, Professor Catherine D'Ignazio, Dr. Gretchen Brion-Meisels, and Dr. Cynthia Breazeal. I'll start by situating the project within participatory AI research and computing education, outlining the methods and reflexivity interventions, then share key findings and their broader implications. So, generative AI often misrepresents diverse perspectives and amplifies systemic harms. Yet, responsible AI training has not kept pace with this rapid adoption. Current frameworks and curricula focus on quantitative harms, neglecting reflexivity, intersectional awareness, and socio-emotional learning essential for just AI development. As one Rutgers professor, Stephanie Dinkins, noted, AI should not flourish just on data, but on stories. Through our research, we gathered a vast amount of stories from students showing how reflexivity can drive justice-centered decisions and more authentic representations of racial identity in AI. Even with the rise of responsible AI education, most curricula still treat bias as something external, something that exists in a data set or in algorithms. But bias also lives within us, in our assumptions, worldviews, and experiences. Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz's Archaeology of Self offers a structured path for reflexivity, a continuous process of examining how identity, history, and experience shape our perceptions and actions. Through stages such as interruption, historical literacy, and critical love, practitioners confront biases and cultivate accountability. For AI developers, this framework provides concrete tools to reflect on how personal and cultural backgrounds influence technical decisions, fostering more justice-centered AI systems. Past research highlights a recurring issue. When technology companies partner with minoritized communities, the outcomes often prioritize institutional or corporate interests rather than the communities themselves. Participatory design centers co-creation with users, while critical participatory action research goes further, using collective inquiry to redistribute power. In data science and AI, CPAR makes communities active partners and pushes data scientists to reflect on how their work reinforces or resists power. Inspired by Dr. Leah Elamin's research about liberation tools, I coined the term liberatory computing. The liberatory computing framework contains 5 different pillars: a sound racial identity, critical consciousness, collective obligation, a liberation-centered academic identity, and the activism skills that are necessary to use computing to mitigate systemic oppression. This paper specifically assesses how students develop and apply their racial identity in data science. So this wasn't just a boot camp, it was a test case for embedding reflexivity in data science and AI. Students explored structural injustice while developing technical and critical inquiry skills, an approach I believe has value far beyond youth programs. So students partnered with 4 social justice organizations: AfroPink, the Vera Institute of Justice, the Algorithmic Justice League, and Sea Grant. Projects range from visualizing breast cancer disparities and studying links between dropout rates and incarceration to analyzing school surveillance bias and exploring ocean acidification's impact on minoritized communities, each producing research for community action. So here are our 2 research questions. To what extent does the Archaeology of Self framework promote reflexivity and support the development of a sound racial identity? And how does a heightened reflexivity and a strengthened sound racial identity shape students' engagement with data activism? Through the Archaeology of Self framework, students strengthen their racial identity in ways that directly influence their data activism, showing greater awareness of how identity shapes design decisions. Second, they learn to formulate more critical research questions, decide which identity categories to analyze or filter through in their data science work, and even debate whether AI should be used or not in their projects. This kind of reflexivity wasn't a detour from their technical work. It enhanced their ability to build more responsible, community-centered technologies. We worked with 34 high school and college students of African descent through virtual and in-person sessions. 28 semi-structured interviews were conducted with the social identity wheel to guide this reflexivity. So, sound racial identity means that a strong, grounded understanding of one's racial identity leads to more critical and more responsible work. Let's unpack that idea. I focused on 3 key components where students demonstrated meaningful growth. First, a high private regard. This is about cultivating genuine pride and a positive, self affirming view of your racial group. Second, high centrality. This means race isn't just about, oh, there you go. Race isn't just a box you check. It's a significant and acknowledged part of your identity. The third component, low public regard. It reflects an awareness of how society holds biased or racist attitudes towards that group and the ability to recognize and confront those patterns, both in data and the systems that generate it. The key takeaway is students didn't simply feel better about themselves. It's that this internal shift fundamentally changed the questions they asked while doing these data activism projects. So let's start with a private regard. 17 students reported increased pride in being African American. One quote really stood out. A student said they were learning to take things a little more seriously. So this quote reflects an important shift from using humor to cope with painful realities to developing a deeper respect for themselves, their community, and the challenges they face. During interviews, several students reported that their race became a more central part of their identity while engaging in data activism. They cited positive representations of African Americans, pride in collective impact, and connection with peers as key influences. This sense of collective action really strengthens some students' centrality. One student explained, "Since I'm not often around people who look like me, it felt good to see that there are others who share similar interests and work ethics, such as being able to focus on something for hours without rushing or slacking off." Several students described how they may have initially felt more connected to their specific ethnicity, but through this process, they developed a deeper connection with their racial identity. When asked if they gained a better understanding of how society holds biases about African Americans, students' responses fell into 2 groups: those who became more aware of systemic racism and those who were already aware. One student reflected, "In school, we tend to say there's no such thing as race. We don't look at race, but subconsciously, everyone has looked at a person and felt some type of way due to stereotypes or media influence." Coming into this program, I didn't really think about it that way. They gained a much deeper understanding of how racism shapes perceptions. Next, I asked 28 students to reflect on how their identities influence their data activism projects and how they examined their own assumptions and biases. Across projects, students centered themes such as race, socioeconomic status, and spirituality. Also, students drew on multiple dimensions of this social identity wheel to deepen their critical reflexivity. Students' racial and ethnic identities directly influence the questions they analyze and the data they chose to analyze. They went beyond descriptive statistics to uncover how systemic inequities shape real-world outcomes. One quote that stood out was when a student said, "Our schools are underfunded." Recently, one of our middle schools was converted into a high school, but funding didn't arrive in time. The outdoor basketball court, tennis courts, and track were all torn up in preparation. This quote is especially meaningful because it comes from a student who said the program helped them take things more seriously, demonstrating how the class strengthened their racial identity and empowered them to apply that growth in their data activism project. Socioeconomic status was also a central theme across many student projects. One student from the Algorithmic Justice League group shared a powerful reflection. The schools that are surveilled tended to be of lower socioeconomic status and also public. The majority of the students who completed the survey were also low income. Instead of just reporting the number of cameras, the student began asking deeper justice-oriented questions. Bringing this all together, what's the big picture for AI and data science? My research shows that reflexivity must become a core skill for all data scientists and AI developers. Ultimately, the expertise that comes from lived experience may be the most powerful tool we have for identifying and mitigating bias in AI. So the message isn't, can these students learn data science, but rather, can data science adapt to include their vital perspectives? We're asking the field to change, to recognize that personal history is part of the equation, instead of demanding students strip themselves of their identity to fit some flawed mold of neutrality. A key next step is integrating reflexivity as a measurable dimension in responsible AI, not just a human practice, but a property AI systems themselves can exhibit. I also plan to assess the long-term impact of the data activism program by following up with 75 alumni through interviews and surveys and focus groups to better understand how it's shaped their current academic paths and engagement with AI and data activism in their everyday life. Also, feel free to scan this QR code if you'd like to access the entire 120-hour curriculum. Additionally, I'm exploring different postdoc and academic appointments, so please feel free to let me know if you have any leads, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Yes.
Thank you for this great talk. I was wondering sort of if you can expand a bit more on sort of where you're planning on taking this next in terms of like what you would do differently in these sort of workshops from the learnings that you've had.
For sure, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, I really loved what Catherine D'Ignazio was able to do with actually like seeing whether students choose to use AI inside of their final projects. The most that we got to was really thinking about this idea of speculative design and like whether AI is even necessary inside of the work that they're doing. But I would love to expand the program to be beyond 120 hours and have it be multiple years so that students can really build that AI literacy if that's something that they choose to do, because I do think it's really important for them to at least acknowledge that it's important to audit these systems and have that critical skill of understanding how do these systems work. So that would definitely be my next step of just trying to expand the program. So if anyone's interested in that, please do let me know. I'm always looking for more collaborators. Yeah, but thank you for your questions.
I have a question. Um, I would love to know how you imagine translating this for CS students, right? The context of higher education is one that these kinds of principles are absolutely not focused on. So I'm curious about advice for how to integrate this into the undergraduate and graduate classroom, if you have thoughts.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that this idea of like understanding the historical context of a data set is really important. And so I feel like in that sense, it can be fairly simple to integrate into a data science curriculum. But I think also this idea of being able to interrogate your own biases, I think it definitely takes a lot of collaboration. And so I think that oftentimes a flipped classroom can work better in that sense, where instead of students just listening to a teacher lecture to them for an hour or two, actually having students like talk with one another and really interrogate their own biases through those types of group projects is also really important inside of that can be integrated into a typical data science curriculum. But I'm also really think that you can't teach AI literacy without teaching history. And so depending on that group, whatever community group that someone's working with, it's really important to understand the history of that group before applying an AI system or model to it. And so oftentimes that might mean having a computer science teacher work with a teacher in urban studies and planning and really trying to collaborate. I don't think that these types of classes can just be can only be taught by someone who just has a technical experience. So I think that it's important that people are willing to work together and collaborate with different departments, because I don't think that this class should even just be taught in a computer science department. Like, I think this could be taught in an education department or psychology department. I think this type of work is really important for every discipline. And I think it could be a great way for people from multiple different majors to get to know each other as well and work together. Yeah.
Thank you so much.